Wei. I'm from Professor Hardway ITM 2000 class. I'm gonna present about open source. Here is my agenda. I'm gonna to explain what is open source software first, and then explain how the open source software differ from the proprietary softwares, and then introduce the criteria for open source software, and then explain why people prefer open source software, and then get to a conclusion, and at last to display my references. Let's step into the first topic. What is open source software? Here you can see the definition. The software is one kind of that source code is public and under a license, and the users get the right to study, change, distribute the software for any purpose. Open source refers to something that can be modified and shared because its design is publicly accessible. That's the definition for the open source and softwares. And then let's step into the second topic, differences with proprietary softwares. Some softwares that only allow the person, the team, or the institution who created it to control over it. People call this kind of software proprietary or closed source softwares. Only the original authors can legally copy, check, and change the software. Besides, in order to use this exclusive software, the computer users have to comply to some rules. Usually, they would sign a license as their first time running the software. The rules focus on user will not do anything to the software without the permission from the original authors. Microsoft Office and Adobe Photoshop are examples of the proprietary softwares. Open source softwares are different. It also shares the source code to anyone as long as you would like to view the code, to copy it and learn from it, modify it, or share it. It's up to you. LibreOffice and GNU image manipulation program are examples of open source software. As they do with proprietary software, users must agree with terms of license display when they run the software at the first time. However, the legal terms totally differ from those proprietary license, which I will introduce after a while. Bruce Perez defines the gives the definition of the open source. The open source doesn't just mean access to the source code. The distribution terms of open source software must comply with the following criteria. The first one is free distribution. The license shall not limit any party from selling or giving the software as a component of aggregate software from several different sources. At the meantime, the license shall not require a royalty or other fee for such sale. By constraining the license to require free redistribution, we emulated the temptation to make gains from open source software. If we didn't do it, there will be a lot of pressure for the cooperators to defeat. The second one is source code. The program must include the source code and allow the code to distribute in compiled form. If some kind of product does not contribute with source code, there must be a well-known way to get the source code from for reasonable reproduction costs or just downloading from the internet without charge. The source code must be the preferred form that programmers would modify the program, deliberately obfuscated source code and the intermediate forms such as the output of a preprocessor or translator are not allowed. The term requires unobfuscated source code because programmers cannot develop the program without modifying them, and the original design of the license is to create. The third one is derived works. The license must allow programmers to modify the original program and derive from it. At the meantime, must allow the derived works to distribute under the same terms of the original one. Only reading the source code isn't enough to support the peer review and rapid evolution selection. In order to rapid evolution selection, programmers need the ability to experiment with the distribute modification. The fourth is integrity of the author source code. The license might require the derived works to have another name or another version number different from the original program. The license must ensure the open source is easily to obtain, but requires the modified source to distribute in a form of original source plus patches. In this way, the unofficial changes can be easily distinguished from the original source. The fifth is no discrimination against persons or groups. The license must not discriminate any person or group. For the maximum benefit from the open source, the maximum diversity of individuals and groups should equally share the ability to access to it and contribute to it. Hence, the license is prohibited to block any persons out of an open source. The sixth one is no discrimination against fields of endeavor. The license must prohibit any persons from using a program in any specific fields of endeavor. It would not be limited the program from being used in business or in genetic research. The major intention to the term is to allow the open source being used commercially. We want the commercial users to join the community, not being excluded them outside. The seventh one is distribution of license. The distribution of a program must not to comply to any additional license. The clause is intended to forbid license traps like closing out the program by indirect means like non-disclosure agreement. The eighth one is also about the license. The one attached to a program must not depending on the program as a part of particular software distribution. If the program is extracted from the distribution and is used or distributed under the terms of license, all parties have the same rights as those that are granted in conjunction with the original software distribution. The clause forbids another class of the license traps. Okay, let's get to the next one. The next one is license must not restrict and answer software. The license must not add any restriction to any other softwares that software distributed along with the distributed software. For example, the license cannot require all other programs distributed on the same medium must be open source softwares. Distributors have their own rights to make their choice of their software. The tenth is a license must be technology neutral. No provision of license may base no any individual technology or style of interface. The provision is intended to specific licenses that require an explicit gesture of assent for a contract established between licensor and licensee. And then the next topic is why people prefer open source softwares. I'm gonna to introduce the advantages of open source softwares. The first one is control, more control over it. Programmers can examine the code to make sure it's not doing anything they don't want it to do, and they can change any parts of it to if they don't like it. And the open source softwares are more freedom. Users who are not programmers can also benefit from the software. They can use the software in any purpose they wish, not just the way someone else thinks they should to do in this way. The second advantage is training. Through the open source softwares, the programmers can like the open source software because it can help them become better programmers. Students can easily study it as they learn to make a better program. And programmers also can share their works with others and invite comments as they develop their skill. When the mistakes of the source code are discovered, programmers can share them with his peers and avoid them from making the same mistakes. The third advantage is security. People prefer open source software because anyone can inspect and modify an open source software. Someone may discover and correct the mistakes or omissions that the original author may have missed. And people think they are more safe and stable than proprietary softwares because they can deal with an open source software without the permission of the original author. They can fix, update, and upgrade the software much quickly than any proprietary softwares because they don't need the permission. The next one is stability. More users prefer open source software to proprietary software for long-term projects because when using an open source software, they enjoy the right to do any change they like to do. And they can shape it in the way that's specific for their long-term project. In that way, the software can be more effective than any proprietary softwares. And also because the original authors publicly distribute the open source software, users who rely on it for important jobs can maintain it by themselves, which eliminates the risk that the software may disappear or falls into problems if the original author stops working on it. Okay, and here we get to the conclusion. I explain what is open source software. That's that's something that can be modified and shared, and which is publicly accessible. I also explain the differences with proprietary softwares. Proprietary software that is not allow others to change the software, but the open source is welcome others to change it. And I also introduced 10 criteria, and therefore open source software, which the definition was given by the Bruce parents. And I also explain why people prefer open source software from 4 aspects. It's more easy to control and more free, and the training and the security and the stability. And here is the, okay. And here is the references. Thank you, everyone.